Mr. President, you know, we just had a vote. Now, imagine for a minute you had a government that was spending too much money. And imagine for a minute that we needed to spend less money. We needed to change our tax code to a tax code that was fair, simpler, didn't pick winners and losers. Imagine for a minute that this was a crisis, and imagine for a minute that this crisis was being wielded like a political 2x4 by the majority of the Republicans that serve in the Senate, this debt crisis. Then imagine for a minute that you had the most profitable corporations in the history of the planet. And they were booking $30 billion in profit every quarter. Over $130 billion in profit year after year. It didn't matter whether the economy was bad, good, or indifferent. Amazing profits. And then imagine for a minute that this government that doesn't have enough money, that a debt that is the political talking point of my friends across the aisle. Imagine if you try to do something simple like say, you know, maybe we shouldn't be spending money on the most profitable corporations in the world. That's what this vote just was. How seriously can we take anybody that talks about debt reduction if they're not willing to pluck the low-hanging fruit of subsidies to a group of folks that, frankly, in Missouri, I guarantee you most people I represent would say they are the least deserving of extra help from the federal government right now. So, if you really think about it, what we're doing is we're borrowing money to prop up, to the tune of billions of dollars a year, already wildly profitable corporations that don't have to pay us royalties because they get to deduct the royalties they pay other countries. Now, I mean, really, seriously, if this was a fairy tale that I was reading to my grandsons, if I was reading this fairy tale to Ian or Levi or Isaac, they would say, well, this obviously is fiction because this couldn't be true. But it is. That is what, Mr. President, I call the definition of a special interest. That oil is so special around here, wields so much power and so much money that it turns all the talk about debt reduction into empty rhetoric. Last year, the 5 companies spent $38 billion boosting their share prices just through stock buybacks. $38 billion in just stock buybacks last year. In other words, the 5 largest oil companies spent in a single year on stock buybacks alone what they are claiming they need in taxpayer-funded subsidies over the next 10 years. According to ExxonMobil's quarterly filings, every time the price of oil goes up by $1, they bring in $350 million in annual profit. These companies don't need these subsidies. Now, you know, I hear people say, well, you know, if you don't give them the subsidies, which, by the way, is chicken feed to them, what, $6 billion, $8 billion a year is nothing if you're banking $30 billion in profits a quarter. I've heard people say, well, you know, if we don't give them this extra help, then they're going to quit exploring for oil. And the price of gas will go up. You know, that's just so dumb. They've had these subsidies for what, 30, 40, 50 years? And I think most Americans realize the price of oil has gone up just fine during that time. We're paying plenty at the gas pump right now, and they've got those subsidies. How's that working out for us? Those subsidies are really keeping down the price of gasoline, aren't they? The former Shell CEO, John Hofmeister, is on record as saying, in the face of sustained high oil prices, it's not an issue for large companies of needing the subsidies to entice us into looking and for producing more oil. My point of view is that with high oil prices, such subsidies are unnecessary. Now, this is the CEO of Shell. He's admitting on the record that these subsidies are unnecessary. At the time that the Shell CEO said that, the price of oil was trading between $95 and $98 a barrel. Currently, it's at $105 a barrel. Contrary to the claims that some are making, eliminating these subsidies will not raise gas prices. Last year, the company spent $70 million to lobby to keep their subsidies. That's they get $30 in tax breaks for every dollar they spend lobbying. No wonder they spend that much money on lobbying. You know, I want to take people at their word, and I want to take people seriously about debt reduction. I have co-sponsored spending caps with my Republican colleagues. I have worked hard on reforming the way we spend money around here, whether it's contracting or earmarks. But with all due respect, I don't know how the American people can take anyone seriously about debt reduction if they are not willing to cut off from the spigot the most wealthy, profitable corporations in the history of the world. How will we ever be able to look our grandchildren in the eye and say, you know, we really took care of your future by making sure that our government was fiscally balanced? How can we ever do that if we can't do this as an easy first step? Can you imagine how paralyzed this place will be when we start talking about the kinds of cuts that hurt people that need them? And by the way, they're willing to make those. Talk about fairness. Think about this for a minute. Economic fairness. The Ryan budget would want to hold on to more tax breaks for multimillionaires. In fact, do more tax breaks for multimillionaires. While they say to seniors, you know, we think it's time for you to wrestle with insurance companies for your health care. I know what it's like to wrestle with insurance companies for health care. Every American does. My mom doesn't have to. She's on Medicare. Gives her peace of mind. So really, if you look at what our friends are proposing in terms of fairness, and you look at the vote we just had, in Missouri, we'd say that dog don't hunt. It just doesn't work. So I hope in good faith that my Republican colleagues will quit thinking that we need to continue to write checks to the wealthiest corporations in the history of the planet. I think Missourians, when I fill up my gas tank over the next 2 weeks as I travel around Missouri, I'm going to stop people at the gas station and say, do you think that the royalties that ExxonMobil pays to another country should be deducted from what they owe us? Think about that. It's ludicrous in this financial environment we're in the United States government. There are real people hurting out there, and we need to treat them fairly. And we can start by pushing big oil away from the taxpayer trough. And I hope my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will reconsider and that we'll get a chance to vote on this again, and they can show the American people that we all get it.